Good evening, library trustees, and welcome to the New York State Trustee Handbook Book Club. I'm Brian Hildreth. I'm your moderator for this evening, and I'm very excited to have all of you with us for what is now the 16th installment of the book club. It has been a wonderful journey of learning and growing together as leaders of this amazing field of librarianship. So we're really grateful to have all of you with us tonight on this wonderful August evening. The purpose of the New York State Trustee Handbook Book Club is to provide explanations and insights for more than 6,000 library trustees in New York State. Each book club session takes a deeper dive into one chapter of the trustee handbook and answers real-life questions received from the field that arise in the areas of governance work for library boards. Before we begin, let's quickly get acquainted with each other, using the technology we've been afforded. If you take a look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button and a chat button. I'll reference the Q&A button shortly, but for now, I'd like each of you to introduce yourself to your colleagues by placing your name, your library, and how many years you've been a trustee in the chat box. And I know that all of you, as soon as you started logging in, you started doing this. So that means you are repeat attendees of the Trustee Handbook Book Club, and we absolutely love that. As all of you say hello in the chat, I'm going to quickly say thank you to Laura Chrissy, who is one of our planning team members and Mid-Hudson Library Systems Sustainability Coordinator. In addition to helping us facilitate all book club installments, she is online with us tonight to help troubleshoot any technical issues some of you might experience, as well as help us manage the chat box. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't shed light on some of our co-promotional sponsors. It is these organizations that continually support libraries and work tirelessly to advance our greater mission for the benefit of all people. Thank you to the New York State Library, the Public Library System Directors Organization, the Library Trustees Association, and the Public Library section of the New York Library Association. We take comfort in knowing these institutions remain steadfast on our behalf. This evening, we're discussing the topic of strategic planning from the Trustee Handbook that assists library administrators with better understanding why it is so important to engage with your community members, listen to their needs, and deliver on those needs through the mission and goals of setting mission and goals. We'll chisel out 90 minutes to receive an overview of the topic from our presenters, Rebecca Smith-Aldrich and Ron Kursop. They'll also provide answers to frequently asked questions, which were sent in advance by our viewers. Thank you to those of you who have submitted ahead of time because it does allow us to better prepare for the evening. Following that, I will moderate the open Q&A by those of you who are attending the live session. When you have questions for Rebecca and Ron, please place them in the Q&A area by selecting the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. This is the best place for all those questions because it allows me to organize them in the same order that they are received. If you have any comments that you'd like to share with any of our colleagues that are joining us, like I think what Rebecca just said is so important, or can somebody share a link to that document Ron just referenced, please feel free to put those comments in the chat area by selecting the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully we'll receive as many questions this month as we've received in our past sessions. The more questions, the better. Planning team members continue to curate your questions so we can get all of them answered at some point. If we can't get to your questions this evening, we will answer them in one of our pre-recorded book club after-party sessions, which you can find at our project's website, midhudson.org/trustee book club. A couple questions I will answer for you before we get started. Yes, this session does count towards New York State legislated library trustee training requirements. And yes, you will receive a certificate sent by email in the coming weeks. Certificates for this session will be received in late August. We appreciate your patience as it does take time to review and confirm participant attendance. By now, most of you know our presenters for this evening because they've been hanging out in this space for the last 2 years with all of you. Our first presenter is Rebecca Smith-Aldrich. She is the Executive Director of Mid-Hudson Library System. Along with co-authoring the Handbook for Library Trustees of New York State, she has also authored the Companion Handbook for New Library Directors in New York State and the Municipal Ballot How-To Guide, as well as 2 books for ALA editions. Ron Kursop is my co-moderator for the Trustee Handbook Book Club. He is also the Executive Director of the OWL Library System. In addition to specializing in the areas of trustee governance, policy development, financial planning, and project management, Ron is heavily involved in the New York Library Association and assists libraries in the strategic planning process. His resources are featured in the trustee handbook, and he's presented during past trustee handbook book club installments. We're all in very good hands this evening as we receive guidance and best practices from Rebecca and Ron. And at this time, I look forward to handing it over to my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Brian. What a great job you do organizing the intros to these to make sure everyone knows where they are, what they're doing, and what's going to happen next. So thank you, Brian. Thanks I think you came back from vacation just to help us. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Brian. That's great.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone who's here tonight. How great to see you in August. We weren't quite sure if this would work doing it in August, but here you are. So that's wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to come this evening. Ron and I are looking forward to our topic tonight of strategic planning. And I just want to really give a shout out to both Brian and Ron, who've been helping with the new edition of the trustee handbook. You see the one here, notes from 2018. Later this year, you're going to see a 2023 edition coming out, all updated. But something that really held true between this issue of 2018 and 2023 is the topic of planning, which is our topic here this evening. So tonight we're talking about strategic planning, and many of you who are experienced know having a long-range plan is actually one of the minimum standards for public and association libraries here in New York State. And that's not the only reason, though, to have a long-range plan. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, both the importance of it, and we're at your request, we're taking on this topic to go a little more deeper on how to actually do planning that is meaningful and will connect with what your community actually needs and raise the profile of your library in the community in a way that doesn't just speak to the good intentions you have, but really produces the impacts that you hope you have when you take a look at your legacy as a library trustee. So we've got the citation here. And like I said, of course, you could just do it so you can check off the box on the annual report to the state next quarter, in the first quarter of next year. But I think in my experience of working with libraries, the planning activity that you do as trustees is actually one of the more fulfilling things you do as a volunteer trustee at your library. And why I say that is because I know it is work, and you're going to see tonight what the work entails. But once you do that work, you're going to feel so confident about the decisions that you're making at the board table at each monthly meeting and at your board committee meetings, because you're going to have a very good sense of what matters to your community. You're going to understand what their aspirations are. You're going to understand how the library is well suited to help them meet their aspirations. And so as you make decisions about how you spend taxpayer dollars, how you utilize the facility that you've been entrusted with, how the staff is spending their time, you're going to feel very confident that you know all those things are going in the right direction because you understand what your community actually needs. And I hope some of you who've been trustees for a long time have noticed that when the minimum standards were updated, there's a really key phrase that pops up over and over and over and over again, which is community-based. We don't want folks just guessing what the community wants or what one person thinks would be cool. We really want folks to talk to your neighbors and understand what's going on in your community and really shift the thinking from what we think is best for them to really putting your community at the heart of the decisions you're making as a library board. And so that's why you see this phrase tied to both the long-range plan minimum standard as well as other aspects of your minimum standards, because why else are we here if not to help our communities? And I think that's at the heart of the presentation we want to do here tonight is how do you hear from all of the stakeholders involved in creating your library, which includes you, which includes your staff, but must include your community as well. And how do you organize a process like that? That's a very big undertaking. So Ron, who's one of the most organized people I know, is going to help lead us through some of these steps that we recommend in the trustee handbook. But we're also here to share the real life stories of libraries, small, medium, and large, who have gone through this process. It really does work regardless of what size library you are a trustee of. So I can say that with confidence after 25 years of helping libraries do long-range plans, and I'll share with you the process that's used in the trustee handbook is something that I've used hands-on with libraries for a very long time. It's actually helped produce most recently 40 plans in my own system over the past 4 years. So it works. it's an action, and it's a tried and true path forward. So there's other methodologies out there that you might be familiar with from other service that you've done or other organizations you've worked with in various capacities. We're not saying there's only one way to do it. We're just here to say that this is a way that's worked very well for libraries in New York in the past. And if you haven't done it before, it's a nice way to get started and accelerate the work that you're going to be doing. So let's take a look at that planning process. And Ron's going to walk us through this and answer the questions that you have along the way.
Thanks, Rebecca. So when you look at this planning process, Rebecca's absolutely right. So this is a slimmed down approach to what some of you, if you have experience in the corporate world, you may have seen a very broad planning projects that could take a year or more in order to put together a strategic plan. The goal with this one is to make sure that it's community-based, as Rebecca said, to make sure that you are talking with a lot of people, to make sure that the board's involved, and to make sure that you're able to put a plan together that's actionable. And at the same time, it's not going to exhaust everybody in terms of the development process. This should be kind of a revitalizing process. As you go through this, it should be exciting you about every step that's coming next when you think about planning for your library. And also, as Rebecca said at the top, this provides you with kind of a roadmap for the direction that you're going in. So if your library's been stuck, or if you're not exactly sure what you should be focusing on next, having some type of developed plan can really help with that. When you think about planning in general, the final product of it is really good and you should have it, but it's that journey along the way. You learn so much about your community, so much about your library, and then so much about what they actually want. This, in my opinion, is arguably as important as any other foundational document that you have. It's not something that you develop and then put in a file cabinet and then you check off all the boxes in 5 years. It's something you should be looking at regularly. Before every board meeting, I'm looking at my strategic plan and I'm talking to my trustees about it to make sure that we're on point with everything. But what we're looking at today, so on page 112 of the handbook, there's this simple planning process. And there's a few steps in here that goes through developing a board vision, assessing the library, gathering community input, analyzing all the stuff that you pulled together, and then looking at the library's ability to move forward. And after you go through all these steps and you're able to put it together, ideally, you'll have a really strong plan that will range however long your library decides, 3, 5 years, however long it might be, so you have projects that you can work on through that time, so you're ultimately developing your library into having a lasting legacy. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to the planning process there, Rebecca?
I think you did a great job, Ron. And I'll just say that every time I go and review this process with a board, by the time I'm done talking, they're like, oh, that's a lot of work. And you're not wrong. It is work, but it's work it's time well spent, I think, to really get to know your board well, your library well, and most importantly, get to know your community well. So you can reverse that and start to really match up what the library is great at with what what the community needs.
So the first step in the planning process, or the simple planning process, is developing a board vision. You don't want to skip this step. When boards say that, or they look at this and they think that it is going to be a lot of work, which it is, sometimes you can naturally feel like there's parts of it that you want to skip, but you don't. This is a really great foundational piece that you will help kick off the rest of your planning piece. And when you're thinking about having a board vision, this allows your trustees to gather together and figure out what is that long-term idea of a library that we want in our community. How do trustees view the library within our community? What are the values that drive the library? And we have some possible values in there from the American Library Association core values. You can use those. When looking at the future, what type of library do you want to leave for your community? And this is the idea of having that lasting impact. We talk a lot about making sure that your library is sustainable, so you have the funding that's appropriate to have a lasting institution. But what are the ideas, or what do you want to leave behind? What's the legacy of your board leaving it to the community, because it is a community asset. So that's what you should be thinking about, is how can we make this library the best it can be right now? And what are our plans for making it long-term a really great asset in our community? There's a few different exercises that you can go through with this one. Rebecca, did you want to get into exercises, or do you want me to go through those ones?
I'm happy to do it, Ron. I think
Yeah.
that, each individual trustee comes to the board table for different reasons. You're motivated because of a personal experience or your family's experience, or because you just really believe that others in the community deserve access to library services. But you might have different flavors, right? Someone might be really driven by the impact of children's services, and other folks might be really motivated by the access to technology throughout the community. So having a vision of what you are really passionate about is very helpful to get that out and really articulate it to your peers on the board so they understand where you're coming from and what you think is most important. And also so you can hear what's most important to other people at the table. So first taking some time with your own thoughts to articulate them, and then having a group conversation so you can see where the intersections lie. When you look at those core values, a lot of the things that people come to the table and believe about library services really do sort into things related to access, or intellectual freedom, or creating communities that are resilient and sustainable in the face of whatever's coming in the future. So as you start to find common language, it will help you throughout the rest of the steps talk as a group about what you're learning, because you're now going to test your vision of what's most important based on what the people are actually doing at your library, how they actually use it, and what they need in the future, and how that might match up or not with your personal passions about the library. It doesn't mean what you care about is going away. It just means we need to align everyone's understandings and expectations by the end of the planning process. So this kind of helps you, I'll jokingly say, get the wiggles out, so you get to have your say right away. And then you can all remember that as you go through the rest of the process, and realize that sometimes we have to adjust our understandings based on things we learn throughout the process.
And this can be a lot of fun too, going through individual exercises or group exercises. There's great examples here on what you can do for this. There's lots of different exercises that you can help you guide your board through, or have your board guide themselves through. One that I used to really love doing that people like to do is, so we'd have our Post-it notes and everything, but we would say, design an organization that would put the library out of business. And the fun part about that is you're thinking about, what is it that the library stands for, and then how can we augment those services? And that can help you think kind of outside the box in terms of, how can we make this library the best it can be, by not only adding to what it has, but maybe what it doesn't have and what we as trustees feel that it should. So there's lots of different ways that you can go about doing this, and have fun with this part. It's not too often that the board gets to kind of break the mold of meeting and going through motion to motion. Sitting down and actually talking about the long-term ability of the library in your community is a lot of fun. And I think that trustees, you should get some enjoyment out of this. It should be a fun exercise.
Yeah. Phase 2 is less fun, right, Ron?
Yeah, this one's a little less fun. So this one's assessing the library. So this is reviewing a lot of information, crunching a lot of numbers. You'll learn a lot through this piece of it, but you don't want to overlook some critical data points that you're going to want to consume and see what you can learn from it. Usually this is broken into two areas. So you have your internal and your external review. Internal, I think libraries are pretty on point with when they're looking at things like circulation statistics. This is year to year. How are we doing in the community? How are we comparing to ourselves over the past few years? What's our program attendance been looking like? What are our Wi-Fi versus sit-down computers? What are those statistics? How's our space being used? So this could be room use outside of library programs. It could be just people who are walking into the building. You do kind of a space assessment and how people are using the different spaces. Door count, it's obviously important. How many people are walking in and out of the library? What our hours are. And this is looking at, just because you're in compliance with minimum standards for the number of hours, are those the right hours that match what your community is looking for? So a lot of this is turning inward and being critical about what is it that we're doing as a library, and what areas maybe do we want to do a bit better in, what areas maybe we want to shift in to make this review a little more interesting. The external review. So one thing that Rebecca said earlier, and you'll keep hearing tonight, is that community piece of it. When you look at an external review, it's looking at how is the library engaging with things outside of the library walls. So when you think about externally, you're looking at census data. So how has your community changed? We, with the most recent census update, some of our communities have changed. It's either grown in population, shrunk in populations, the demographics has shifted, median household income is different, and that can be pretty impactful on a library. So looking at what is it that our community has changed with statistically that we can take a look at. Looking at what trends are happening in the community is really important too. What's going on around you, what big decisions are being made. Looking at town master plans and school board master plans, what are the large organizations in your community looking at doing, or what are they considering? The library can be impactful to those ones. So pay attention to what those big decisions are. You don't want to silo the library off to not be connected with those things. And just looking at that information can help start getting the library to think about how can we be involved in these larger community aspirations. And then looking at all the other community organizations as well. There's going to be a lot of nonprofits in your community, for-profits, lots of businesses. You're part of an ecosystem that is quite impactful for your entire population that you serve. So taking a look at how you interact with and how you could potentially interact with those groups is going to be really important. This step does take a lot of work. It takes some time, but it will be enlightening when you start looking at all this information and comparing internally versus externally how you're doing as an organization. Go ahead, Rebecca. What else you got for this one?
I think there's two words I want to comment on, which is context and patterns. I think with your internal review, you're looking for the context of the statistics. What are the trends, right? What are the trends that you've seen over time? And a lot of the trends that we got very used to were completely shattered during COVID. I think as we started to think about how people use our libraries, how we develop our collections, what programs people are interested to coming to, how important our physical location is based compared to outreach activities we do out in the community. A lot of our assumptions about how people use our libraries have changed over the past 3 years. So I think a fresh look at data, but not just a snapshot of last year. How does that compare to maybe pre-pandemic? That's really what you want to see, is that trend. What has changed? What's going up? What's going down? What have the patrons actually just completely stopped using? What are they using way more than you ever realized? These are all things that kind of help you understand where emphasis lies in terms of development for the future. And on the external review, that's where the word pattern always comes to mind to me. But first, I'll say that sometimes in those town and school board master plans, you find some of your homework has been done for you. You might find that they've already done the demographic analysis of your community that you serve. You might find that they've already done a lot of interviews or community asset assessments. So sometimes there's great stuff buried in those plans if they're not too old, right? I would say anything pre-pandemic, that's nice, but you need to do your own work. But if you found a plan that had been done by another organization in the community that was only done maybe a year or two ago, I bet there's a lot of great content in there that you can extrapolate into your own assessment that you're doing in this phase. But the other thing, again, you're looking for are patterns. What are patterns that you're seeing in these data sets and reports that you have access to? So are you seeing shifts in lifestyle changes? So we saw here in the Hudson Valley, as COVID really changed and reprioritized what people cared about in their life, we saw a lot of people moving up from New York City into our region. We saw a lot more remote workers than we ever had in this region before. We saw a lot more people who wanted to be in the outdoors than we ever saw before, thanks to COVID. And that's really shifted how people live their lives in our community. So at our system, we've actually seen more people are using their local library and borrowing books on site than they are putting through the delivery system to go from library to library, right? So there's little trends and little changes in the external data that give you hints and insights into the trends you might be seeing in your internal review of data. So as you can see, I think this part's very interesting, but your staff are going to be critical. They might already have a lot of these reviews done because they have to make decisions every day about resources and program development. So we're not saying that all of this is on the shoulders of the Board of Trustees. Again, your staff may have a lot of this done already or can easily put their hands on a lot of this data. Your ILS software can generate reports for you. Your staff are keeping statistics all the time to do their reporting to the community and the state. So while it's a long list, a lot of it might already be pretty close to your fingertips or within range. All right, Ron, I feel like I talked a lot there. Sorry about that. You want to move on to the next one? Nope. I can't hear Ron. Can other people hear Ron?
How's that? Is that better?
That is better, Ron. Thank
I
you.
hit a button. Sorry about that. I was just saying how I think you and I are a bit data nerds. So this is kind of one of my favorite spots of the analysis. I'm curious. I'll ask your opinion on the next slide. We're looking at gathering community input. What do you think, Rebecca? Is this your favorite or least favorite part of the planning process?
It's actually my absolute favorite part.
You love this part?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
You know, in my former position here at Mid-Hudson, I did over 250 community focus groups on behalf of my members. And
Yeah.
it's one of the things I miss the most about my former position here at Mid-Hudson.
So I have also done a lot of focus groups, and this is where the tires hit the pavement when you're talking about community base. So before this, we were looking at these different data analysis pieces, internal and external, but you weren't actually talking to very many people. You were looking at the data piece of it. This is the part where you start talking with people in a variety of different ways. So there's different activities that you can do, but this is getting your community to say, this is what we're thinking. And you can do this in a variety of ways. We have 3 really good methods for collecting this information. So we have surveys, focus groups, and interviewing community leaders. Now, I don't expect every library to be professional survey developers. And depending on what libraries in your area have done in the past, there may be other surveys that you liked. You can take a look at what the questions are asking. You can develop your own questions. A couple pro tips with surveys. You want to keep them relatively short because nobody wants to sit down to take a test. You want to make sure that, I said test, so you want to make sure that you're not asking testing questions. Mainly what this is for is you're gathering opinions. You don't want to necessarily sway what people already know about the library. You're just looking at gathering some input. So short, you want to ask opinions, and you want to get it. When you think about distribution, you want to send it out as broad as possible. But before you send it out, what I would suggest is if you have maybe a 5 to 10 question survey, you really like the questions that are on there, have some non-library people test it out first. Make sure that all your questions make sense. Make sure that they can ask them or they can answer them, and there isn't any library lingo in there that people don't necessarily know. Not everybody knows what an ILS is or what circulation in context of the library means. So having some non-library people really look at it can help you determine what are going to be the best survey questions that you can put together. Focus groups. So focus groups you can do in a variety of different ways. I'm sure the way that Rebecca has facilitated focus groups, of course, you've probably done small focus groups and huge focus groups too for various projects. Having somebody facilitate a focus group, it can be a challenge. So finding somebody that feels comfortable in that space, that are able to answer questions or that ask questions and keep people talking about what it is that they're there for. I find that focus groups work really well when you're asking questions about something very specific and they can kind of build on each other's conversations. But there's a lot of different ways that you can set those focus groups up. And depending on who you have facilitating them, they may be more comfortable with smaller groups, larger groups. It all depends. When you think about the audiences for focus groups, typically I like to do some homogenous groups where we have maybe we have storytime parents works really well, and then maybe we have a separate focus group for just the friends group, and then we have a focus group with just general community members that want to be able to come and voice their opinions. You can have as many focus groups as you want. For a lot of the planning projects I've worked on, we usually do between one to three, depending on the size of the community, who wants to come, and how many focus groups that they want. So it's really variable when you think about implementing focus groups. And then the next one is interviewing community leaders. And when I think about community leaders, these are the heavy hitters in the community. These are the people like the superintendent of schools, the mayor, people who may be on your town board, people who may be on the school board. Maybe there's certain teachers in your community that have really impactful really impactful presence. And the questions that we have here, you'll notice that none of them are really asking about the library specifically. And that's intentional, because when you're asking questions about the challenges that people will face in the next 2 to 3 years, what major decisions and what goals or aspirations they have, they start to think broader in terms of how they interact with the community. Everybody, if you ask somebody, what would you like the library to do, they're going to say more books, more programs, more hours is pretty much what you'll get. What you'll get a lot more information on is when you start asking them about what they're looking for from their organizations or their groups or their communities that they're part of, and you'll be able to gather this information in a much broader way. And then it's the library's job to tease out that information and say, well, the library can do certain things with this piece or this piece. And that's how we're going to kind of narrow that down. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Rebecca, I'd love to hear your take on surveys, focus groups, and interviewing community leaders, or just one of them, if there's one that you particularly love to talk about.
I'll just share one of my own personal key learnings about planning over time. You know, I think I've mentioned over 20 years working on issues related to this. And about 10 years ago, I learned that I'd been doing it wrong for the first 10 years that I was working on it. So for the first 10 years, I was, right in there with everybody else doing surveys about, do you like us? Do you think our hours are great? Don't you love our children's programs, right? We just were looking for validation that what we were doing was right, which wasn't really advancing our thinking or truly thinking about the outcomes of what we were doing. And then, we're going to talk in a minute about a program from the American Library Association that completely changed my thinking, which is, what if you put the community at the heart of your planning process instead of your library, which was like this radical idea. It sounds so simple, right? But thinking about, what does the community actually need? What are their goals? And Ron has shaped some of this here for you in the community leaders interview questions he's got here for you. And we're going to share another set of questions on the next slide. But really actually asking people, what are your goals? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Maybe as a parent, as a community, as a neighborhood, as a community leader, whether they be formally elected or an informal leader in the community, which many of you know informal leaders in the community as folks who might be opinion leaders, or they just step up all the time to help out with things, even though no one elected them to do so. So I think that idea of finding out what people are actually experts in, which is living their life and being a member of the community, it's much easier for them to answer those questions. If you center everything about the library and you're just asking them, what do you think of this program? And what do you think of these hours? Most of the time, in my experience, they're just trying to tell you what they think you want to hear. And what it results in, to Ron's point, is just more, more, more. And we all know they want more. We'd love to give you more, but it all takes money, right? So in order to inspire people to invest in what you're going to do in the future, you need to tie it to what they value. And finding out what they value requires having a different conversation than we may have had with them in the past about what the goals are. And again, centering that on the community, I think it makes it much easier for library people to say, oh, well, what we heard over and over again is that people in this community think the graduation rate is way too low from high school. Well, the library can help with that. Here are the things we can bring to the table to help with that goal, right? Instead of saying that, oh, you think the hours of this need to be adjusted from here to here. Oh, okay. Well, that's going to have this little impact over time. Instead of saying one of our 3 major goals that we're investing time, money, staff time into is going to be student success, and you let the staff run with that, you're going to have a much bigger impact on the community community over time. So I think it accelerates the ability to have a big impact on your community by just making that little switch of asking people about their lives and the community rather than about the library.
Well put.
So these are the questions we were talking about before. And Ron, I'll let you start off on this one, but I just want to share my experiences when you're done.
Yeah, so with the libraries transforming communities, so this is a set of 4 simple questions when you first look at them, but they dig deep when you start talking with groups about this. And Rebecca actually turned me onto these several years ago. And much like she had said, planning wasn't as smooth sailing as it could have been if I got out of the library mentality and more thinking about the community itself. So thinking about what kind of community do people want to live in, which is a pretty powerful question. And when you ask people this type of question, they have to stop and think about it for a second. And I'm sure that if we pose this question to you, it would take a minute because you would want to think, how do I exist within my community now and what's going to happen next? So it gives people an opportunity to think about it. And then in turn, you get to listen to all the information that comes out of it next, asking about why this is important, how it's different from how you see things now, and what are things that need to happen in order to create that kind of change. When you sit down and you can listen to people answer these types of questions and pilot it away from the library and more bring it to the actual community, you're going to get a ton of information. I've used these questions quite a bit during a lot of one-on-one interviews, but we've also used these for focus groups too. And it's really interesting to hear how people answer these different questions and how they play off the comments that are coming from one another about the community that they love, about the community that they live in and that they care about and they want to be successful. And then the library gets to be part of deciding how they fit into creating that successful community. Rebecca, I know you've used this tons, so I'd love to hear your experiences with this a bit.
You did such a good job reviewing that, Ron. I just wanted to share a couple stories of when we have used it. We have a program at Mid-Hudson where we train our member libraries in these questions, and they facilitate these conversations back home in their own communities. And the very first year we did this, and I was learning myself, and so I went and helped out with some of them. And I watched this group. Ron mentioned, you got options of who are you bringing to the table together, and this group was a real mixture, people from all over, all corners of the community. And the thing that was really key about it is they were people who wouldn't normally talk to each other, and so they got to have this conversation about their community and what they really value about it. And you saw people on multiple ends of the political spectrum, which today you find hard to believe they'd ever find anything they could agree on. And you heard it just come out naturally about what they really care about and what, maybe they're sharing tactics of how to get there that doesn't always agree with someone else's vision of how to get there. But at the end of the day, they mostly all wanted the same thing. And I'm just revealing the secret to over 260 people here this evening, that even though we've done this in 40 different communities in my system, the outcomes are almost always the same in terms of what people want at the end of the day. And so in the first one I went to and we did this work, it resulted in a spontaneous volunteer group forming at the focus group. They were talking about how they moved to this community because it was so beautiful and they love being in the outdoors and going hiking. But, remember back in the 70s, we used to have these block parties and we would clean up the hiking trails in town. And yeah, we should do that again. And by the end of the session, they'd passed around a sign-in sheet. Someone agreed to do the barbecue. Someone else was going to get the garbage bags, and they self-organized to bring their vision of the community to life. And the best part of the story was the library literally did nothing and got all the credit for it. So in these moments when people realize they have common goals, they're more willing to work together. And at the end of the day, that is what the world is calling for in this moment in time, whether you're thinking about climate change or politics or social struggles that we have in our local communities. What the moment really calls for is to people to come together and understand that we care about each other and we're willing to work together to make the community better. So these questions help to reveal these, and we want to give full credit. This is a program from the American Library Association, underwritten by them. They hired the Harwood Institute, which you may have heard of because they were pretty phenomenal group of people that came together in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shootings. Many of us remember that there was a major anniversary of the Sandy Hook shootings this year. But how do you bring together a community that's just gone through something so horrific? This group tackled that, and the methodologies they've created have well-served libraries throughout the country. So if you're not sold on the program, I think Ron and I are doing a good job of selling it to you. It's actually really easy to use too. So Laura's going to put a link in the chat box if she hasn't already for where you can access these resources. There's recorded webinars where you can learn how to use them. All the resources you need are at your fingertips. And I bet your system people know about it too, so they can maybe be a support to you in the work. But it's just incredibly impactful work. And as much as I love my job before I learned about this, it makes my love my job twice as much because I see change happening when libraries use these tools. It's very important work that makes a difference in people's lives, which I'm pretty sure is why you're here on August 15th, when you could be anywhere else in the world, figuring out how to make your library as impactful as possible.
Rebecca, I feel like this is one of our most like aspirational
Oh,
trustee
yeah.
handbook book clubs so far.
Making the world better, one trustee at a time.
That's right. That's right. So we collected a lot of information, right? So we gathered some community input. We went through and we asked a bunch of people questions. We did internal and external analysis. Now we have these piles and piles of data. And now we have to read through all of it and find what the deeper meaning is. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard of SWOT analysis, and that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I've kind of shifted, and I think actually Rebecca influenced me on this a lot. And I've shifted away from SWOT analysis, and I look more at SOAR analysis. And this is looking very specifically at the strengths, the opportunities, the aspirations, and the results that can come out of this information as you're reviewing it. As you're going through, you can pick out what are the strengths that people are looking for, what strengths the library currently have, what opportunities are we presented with, what are we aspiring to be, or what are the visions, and what are the actual results that we can hang our hat on at the end of the day and feel very proud of. And on the next slide, there's some questions that you can ask to kind of help go through this analysis with all of this information. And that's looking at what are our greatest strengths, what are our best opportunities that we can capitalize on or leverage to be better in our community, what's our preferred future. So this goes back to that kind of board visioning piece of it, like our aspirations, what we're looking for. If we look off in the distance, 10, 15, 20 years from now, what does our library look like? What do we want it to look like? And then what are the measurable results that will tell us that we've achieved that vision of the future? Now, the future is always shifting, but we can look at what are the things that we can measure to say, yes, we've put the work in and we've moved the needle a little bit on this piece. We're going to keep going this direction, or we're going to start focusing on a different direction. So how does all this information or this data help us analyze what we're good at, what we have opportunities in, what we want to become, and what are those results or those things that we can do to get there? Rebecca, what do you have about SOAR analysis?
I think it also gives you permission to say, we can't help with that, right? You're going to hear
Absolutely.
some stuff in this process that's obviously necessary. It needs attention, but the library might not be best suited to address that issue in the community. So sometimes the role is going to be to pass that information along to the agency or official who is best suited to deal with that issue. And sometimes just being the message carrier from the public to the people that need to hear that. And maybe they already know, or maybe they really appreciate some fresh insights onto how the public is feeling about that topic. So also giving the organization permission to say, we agree. That's a tough one out there. We don't quite have the assets or the resources to address that one. We're happy to be at the table to discuss it in the future, but we're going to pass that one on to an agency that's better suited to it. So this is that moment, right? It starts with, what are your strengths as a library, right? You cannot be all things to all people. We have to narrow things down. And this process is where you start to filter out, this is all the information we got, but here's where we can make an impact. If we just tweak this, if we offer this, if we hired staff with these skills, we would be able to actually make a difference in this area of work, and letting go of the stuff that you cannot. That's an important part of this part. So I think that Ron does a great job of describing this, because at number 4, measurable results, right? It's not just like, I feel like this is going really well, right? You want to be able to say like, oh, there's some metrics that I could put in place that would demonstrate, yes, people are having an experience at our library that is making a difference in their lives, not just like high-fiving and yep, good enough. Like, let's keep going. So I think there's some things that you probably can't measure, but there's a lot of things you can. And I know a link that Laura is going to shoot me, but I didn't send to her, but we're going to put in this list of resources you get afterwards, is again, project outcome-based evaluation tools that help you measure, did the program land the way you hoped it would and actually have the impact that you wanted over time. So I think measuring our results is important because, as you noted, when Ron reviewed the steps of this process, part of this is storytelling at the end. Why did you do it? And what impact did you have?
Well said. So now we need to take a look at what is the library's capacity to move forward in a few different areas that are associated with your library. So when you're looking at the capacity to move forward, how can we, what do we have in terms of the people that are working for the organization? What about the money that we have, our building itself, what we're trying to do in terms of the policies that we have, what partnerships can we identify? One of the minimum standards is actually looking at the various community partnerships and having community partnerships. And what better way to highlight that than showing the partnerships that you currently have and what you can build on right in your plan. Governance, that's what the board's looking at. What kind of marketing and public relations are you going to be doing? And as Rebecca said, the measurement and the evaluation of it. So are the things that you're doing realistically measurable, and how are you going to evaluate them? And Rebecca did mention project outcome. That was a really interesting project that was put together by the Public Library Association. And like she said, we'll send you some resources out there, but it's a really great way to measure certain types of programs or situations that you're having at your library. So when you're thinking about library capacity, these are some broad issues, well, actually specific issues that you should really focus in on to make sure that you have the resources that you need to accomplish everything within your plan. And when you're thinking about these different aspects, what you want to keep in mind is that your plan and your other foundational documents, like your budget, they need to go hand in hand together. You need to make sure that you have the people to be able to accomplish the things that you want to do, and you have the money to be able to do that as well. So those ideas need to go hand in hand. If you have something in your plan that says we really want to focus on early childhood literacy, but your budget doesn't reflect anything that has to do with children's books, story times, children's programs, then how much of an impact are you making? There should be something that's going back to both of those documents to time together to show that this is what we're doing. This is the information, or this is the money that we're investing in these places that we want to work with to move forward. Rebecca, I'll let you go ahead and chime in on this one too.
I think of this as like the gap analysis. Like if you see to yourself, this is what we heard over and over again from the community they need help with. And we do have a position in the community to help with this, but we're not quite there yet. Like we see the potential, but we're going to have to make some changes, and it might take multiple years to make those changes. And so I think having a realistic vision of the capacity of your organization is incredibly important. Your staff are amazing, but they are not superhuman. So making sure they're very clear on the priorities and what they'll need to adjust to make sure that we can meet the objectives that we're telling the community are going to help us get to the goals we set for ourselves. So Ron's going to go over like how to structure your plan, but that old adage of like goals, objectives, and actions, right? These are the actions you're taking. These are not your goals. These are the actions. And far too often I see library plans that the major goal is all internally focused. Our major goal is to switch to Office 365. Our major goal is to renovate the landscaping. It's like, those are actions that live underneath your goals. Why are you doing these things, right? You should be informing why you are doing these things. And there is work to be done internally to make these things possible. And that's where your staff plays a very big role. They have to be honest with you about, okay, we hear what you're saying, that we agree, we heard it too, but here's the reality of how many staff hours we currently have, right? So we're going to have to prioritize, we're going to have to drop some stuff, or you have to acknowledge that building is just, it does not cut it based on what the community is looking for. You might be the only place in town to gather. And so is your meeting space adequate for what the community is really looking for? And if not, have you then prioritized that in your facility planning? Are you prioritizing that in your fundraising and grant writing? All these things tie tie together and line up. So this capacity exercise, it has to be part of the work. It can't just be an aspirational exercise. We also need a reality check.
So this one, so think about this. This is just a piece of paper. This is what we're going to use to actually build your library's plan. So we got a ton of information. We evaluated it. We talked to the community. We figured out what our strengths and our opportunities were. So how do we put that together in a final document that we can actually use? This is a really simplified version. I suggest starting with this, and then you can make it pretty as you move forward. Yesterday, Rebecca sent me the Hauppauge Library Strategic Plan, which I think it's really pretty and gorgeous. And you'll get to that point, but start out with something really simple. Don't worry so much about the editing. This first draft of it, you just want to get everything on there to make sure that it makes sense. And when you're thinking about your library plan, there's a few elements that you want to make sure that you include. One is you want a summary of everything that you did. And the reason that you want to do this is because when the community says, well, how did you come up with this? Or why are you doing this specific thing? You want to say, we talked to people. This is the information that we gathered. This is how we did our analysis. These are the different activities that we performed. It's going to be really important, one, to kind of show that outward facing conversation with the community that you were able to build this plan. And at the same time, it also allows future boards to know, well, this is what activities we did in this past plan when we did it. So we can either model off of this, or when we did our last plan, we tried these activities. Let's try a little something different to get some more information. So you're creating a record, and you're also communicating out, how did we build this? Section 2, that's going to be your mission statement. A library should have a mission. Everything in your plan should relate back to your mission. It's going to be very individualized per library what that mission statement is, but everything in your plan should do something towards accomplishing that mission. Again, if your mission is to support literacy in the community, but each one of your goals has nothing to do with literacy, then you're kind of you have this dissonance between what you're trying to accomplish versus what your mission is saying too. So you want to make sure those things are in alignment. And then the third section is the goals. So what are you actually trying to accomplish? These can be goals, these can be priority areas, these can be large scale projects. And I have 3 sections in here where you have these kind of 3 overarching goals. If you think of the word priorities, if you may have heard that if you have 10 priorities, you really don't have any priorities, because you need to make sure, as we were talking about earlier, that you have the money, the people, and the bandwidth to be able to actually accomplish everything within your plan. So really take a look at this and come up with those broad areas that you're going to be able to implement within your community, and be able to kind of build action steps under that will add up to it. So so as Rebecca said, doing the landscaping, that's not an overall goal, or even if you're looking at possibly renovating your meeting room space. But if you're trying to make the best meeting room space for your community, and you have that as your large goal, maybe the landscaping, maybe construction aid application that's going to renovate your space, maybe looking at what are the AV aspects that we need to have to make this the best space. Maybe you come up with a bunch of action items that will get to that overall goal. So we have different project areas, and each one you kind of repeat the information. Who's going to be the leader? Why are we doing this? So how does it relate back to our mission? How are we going to measure our success in this? And then what are the steps that we need to take? I do a lot of work in project management, and one of the books that I always talk about is called Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog. And the idea of it is, if you had to eat a frog, how would you do it? And when would you do it? And the best way to think about it is, if your overall project is this huge thing, that's not something that you put on your list that you can just check off. You have to cut it up. You have to figure out what's the best way that we can break this down into smaller pieces, so we're able to complete these different action steps that add up to that larger project. What are a few of those that you're going to be able to accomplish? Put those on there as when you're putting together your draft plan. Make sure that people are on board with this, and they can see the direction that the library is trying to head in, so you can make sure that your plan is effective. as you're putting this together, most likely you're probably going to have a ton of things that you really want to do, but you're not going to be able to accomplish everything, and that's okay. There's some things that you may need to set aside for now. So what are you going to prioritize? And then once you accomplish those, you may be able to add something else later. Maybe the next plan we can prioritize something different. But what are the key things that you heard the most that you as a board want to focus on? Whatever's going to create, whatever your current step is to make the library a bit better in your community. One strategic plan is not going to correct everything. It's not going to make you the perfect library. This is one iteration of the entire lifespan of the library. So we're going to focus on some very specific things now. We're going to focus on some specific things in the future. So this is an ongoing process, which is really great, because it's almost like you kind of get to reinvent yourself every few years. And even though we're still looking at that long-term goal that we want to accomplish, we're able to try different things. Libraries are just petri dishes of experimentation to figure out what's working. We talked to our community, they said we wanted this, we tried it out, it was really successful, or we tried this out, it didn't really work out so well. So how are we going to shift and kind of look at a different priority area that will actually impact our community? So the idea of creating a plan that looks something like this is, what are we prioritizing? Who's going to be in charge of it? How are we going to measure it? And what are those steps that's going to get us there? That was a lot of talking. Go ahead, Rebecca. What do you got?
Oh, it's so good, Ron. I mean, your expertise in project management, I think, is how you make the impossible doable, right? When you think about aspirations and visions, right? But then we've got to get down to, how do we actually do this? What are the resources we actually have? Who is in charge of this? Where are the checkpoints in the process? So I love Ron's emphasis on the word iteration, that you are iterating. This is a living document. And I know this question will come up if it hasn't already in the Q&A box. But thinking about the span of this plan, when I first started way back when, I would see long range plans that were 10 years span. Then it trended to 5 years. Now we're seeing 1 to 3 year plans. So I think 3 is most common at this point, but then what you're seeing are annual action plans coming out of those 3 year plans. So we are agreeing in January, this is what we hope to accomplish by the end of this 12 months. And here's who's doing what. And we check in with each other on how it's going. And it's something that is living and working and everyone's on the same page about. And that's how you get stuff done, right? Like as a team. So Ron helped organize a massive project we worked on several years ago. Remember the iLead project that we worked on in Utica? And his ability to organize that and force us to make hard choices, that is part of this process. And I think that's what Ron helped to really show in this outline. I know it might seem daunting because you have to do all this work to get to this moment, but making sure you're always funneling down to what's doable in this moment and what we wish we could do. Okay, we can't do it today. What are the steps to get there? And building that into the work that you're doing. So iteration, I think, is an important word here, because once you finalize the plan, it doesn't mean it can never be changed. So I really want boards to feel empowered to say, like, after 12 months of this, we're on the wrong path, or that's never going to happen because this just changed. This, I don't know, like a pandemic hit. I don't know, that might have changed some plans, right, for people in their libraries. So giving yourself permission, but building in the time to have those conversations at your committee and board tables is pretty important. So I don't know about you, Ron, but I feel like we've been talking for like a very long time.
We've been talking a lot. So let's hand it over to Brian.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, you guys talking is a good thing. I feel like you're selling it. It's
right.
good. It's good.
All right.
Hey, so we're going to just jump into these questions. We've got some pre-submitted questions from folks before we got online here tonight. And then we've also got about a half a dozen questions that have come in. And so I would just encourage folks to continue to post those questions in the Q&A button at the bottom. If we don't get to those questions tonight, no worries. We do after parties, and we'll make sure we get those questions answered. So there are resources up on our website. So the first question to you guys is, who is responsible for project managing the library's strategic planning process? Is it the library director, the board president, or a committee of the board? So I'm thinking of that duties or shared responsibilities chart that we have in the trustee handbook. Who's doing this overall comprehensive process?
Yeah, I'll start with this one, Rebecca, and then I'll pass it to you, because I think this question It kind of depends how things are how things operate at your library. And I think the question, the person who asked the question is the key piece is who is responsible for project managing. So kind of a singular individual. When you think about managing any types of project, it's good to have one point person that's kind of guiding the direction. Now, the director, the board president, committees of the board, the entire board, they're all going to be involved in this piece. And if you have a planning committee of your board that says, here are the activities that we want to make sure that we are going to cover with this process, and how are we going to make sure this is done? And if you have that point person who's just kind of guiding the rest of the group through this process, I find that to be very important. I also really like having planning committees that to work with. So at our system, because we have 42 libraries, we have kind of a cohort setup, which I kind of stole that idea from Rebecca too. And I really like to talk to kind of the head of the planning committee and the director, and then they report out to the rest of the committee, which then will give updates to the boards. But it's a smaller working group, but there's usually the chair of the committee or the director who's kind of guiding all the activities. Rebecca, do you do things similarly, differently? How does it work for how you like to do planning projects?
Yeah, I would just say +1 to what Ron just said. It can depend on the size of the library, who ends up in the lead on it, but Ron's description of a planning committee, which is going to be made up of probably both trustees and staff, but always will have your director co-chairing with the chair of the planning committee, and then reporting back out to the full board at various intervals to bring them along in that process, and make sure the process is actually working for the organization as well.
So I think that is a good segue in terms of not only who's leading the process, but also who's involved in the process. So our next pre-submitted question is, how much involvement do library staff have in that strategic planning process?
You want to kick us off on this one, Rebecca?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a team effort, and I think that's, you can't really get very far without help from the staff. So you'll find staff. I think it's important to have staff on the planning committee in addition to your director, at your director's discretion, depending on how large your staff is. I'm hearing some of my small library directors going, Rebecca, it's like me and one other person. How are we going to run the library? So it will depend on the size of your library, but your director's always involved. And then they may bring the staff in at different parts of that process, which I think you heard us say, there's the board visioning process, staff probably not involved in that, but they want to hear the results of it. So your director will convey that. The assessment part, the staff are going to be all over that, helping you gather data and interpret that data for you, sharing what they've seen. One of the things we also sometimes add to that internal assessment is staff observations. So an exercise we do periodically with our libraries is we have the staff keep a no log. Why do they have to say no to staff, to their patrons, right? Every time they say, nope, sorry, can't do that, they write it down. And sometimes it reveals trends, or no, sorry, we don't have that. So it can reveal a trend about a policy problem, or the fact that you don't have a database that everyone's asking for, or there's some other issue. Nope, don't have that book. Well, hey, if 7 people ask for the book, let's just get the book. But the staff have such insights into what the patrons love, what they're not so crazy about, how programs are going. You definitely want staff involvement at that part, because really, keeping the staff abreast of this whole planning process is just as important as keeping the board abreast of what's going on. Because if they understand why the board puts the specific goals in that they do at the end of the day, they're going to hit the ground running because they get why it's so important to work on those things.
And if they don't know why, or if they're not included in that process, they're going to feel pretty excluded when you actually try to implement this and ask for their help for it. So I agree 100% with everything that Rebecca said.
I look at the library plan template, and each one of those goals has a project leader. And this is for for our library system, we're a mid-sized organization. And this is where I love to involve library staff, because normally each staff member has some role or is the project leader of one of those goals. And they're the ones that are making sure that it gets seen through and that it happens. And so, yeah, they're an important part of it. And it's important that, they're the ones that are going to make sure that it gets seen through. And the director's role is reporting that back out to the board. So always making sure staff are involved in that. And also it does depend on the size of the library as well. So third question is it necessary? Oh, I like this one. Is it necessary to meet with community members in person to create a strategic plan? It seems like surveys and existing community data should be enough to go on. And you guys presented a lot of this stuff just in the last 40 minutes.
I had this, this is many years ago, but I was helping a library that serves a large city. And I went through all the planning process and I explained everything. And I just over and over again said how important the gathering community input phase is. And then 6 months later, they came to me and said, oh, we finished our report. We're submitting it to you in the state. I'm like, oh, congratulations. It's so great. And I read it. And then I called the director. I'm like, I don't see your methodology for how you did the community input. Oh, we skipped that step.
I've run into the same situation, and it is necessary. It's something where I would say that meeting with the community members to help create your strategic plan is the most important part, because when you think about surveys, surveys can generate opinion data, and that's what they get. You're going to get opinions, and that's what's going to come in, but it's limited. You can have open-ended questions, but it's kind of out of context because you don't know exactly what it is. When you meet with people and ask those questions and have those conversations, you're going to get below just the opinion information, and you're going to get much more meaningful information that you're going to pull out of this. And I said earlier, like, this has kind of been an aspirational talk. Like, this is the part that's going to get you excited about your library, is talking to people about what they're seeing in their community, where they want to live, how they see that happening. When you look at survey data, it can be interesting, but it's not the end all be all. And a lot of times survey data, you're not going to get enough people to make that data really even scientifically applicable. You might only get a few people that take it, and you can use it as opinions, and that's fine. But the more people that you talk to, the more meaningful information. So I feel very strongly that you have to talk to people, and it has to be more than just survey and then that existing community data. It's all important to have together, but I wouldn't prioritize data sheets over actually talking with your community.
I think there's a hidden value too that we haven't really talked about yet. And this is where I'm putting my kind of political campaigner hat on, because, you know, a big part of the work we do at Systems is helping our libraries be successful at the polls when they go out for a public vote or a building referendum. And part of what you're doing is market research, which is what Ron's describing, but also you're building support and you're building your reputation by this outward focus and engagement work that you're doing, by getting out there and being visible and we actually, with our libraries, we do a press release about the process that we're using to demonstrate that this library is open. We want to hear what you have to say. And it lends the authenticity you need to deliver a plan to start with that people are like, that makes sense. That's based on things that I believe too. And it also means at the end of the story, when you're telling, this is why we worked on this, we heard from our community. There is nothing stronger in a building referendum campaign or a budget campaign when you say these words, based on what we heard from the community, we are doing XYZ, or we are asking for XYZ. They want to know that you just didn't pull that number out of thin air, that you're not just doing a vanity project, that the staff just thought this was cool, right? You're doing it because it matters. And it doesn't matter if the community doesn't understand why you're doing it. That's a really tough part of what we do. We think we know best sometimes, and maybe we do, but we need that validated by the public input in our process.
Storytelling is like one of my most favorite things about librarianship. And I know that sounds a little bit ironic, but like we even talk about this when we do advocacy work, whether it's the state, you know, local or federal level. You know, we bring that hard data to our elected officials and share with them, like, you know, what it is that we do and how we objectively make a difference in our community. But it's the advocates that show up with us and tell us the stories about how that library changed their life or made a notable difference in the way that they go about their day to day. And it's those stories that stick with the elected officials, because when we go meet with them again 12 months later, they're sharing those stories back to us because they listened to us and they heard that. And then when they went make key decisions on how legislation or funding impacts libraries, they voted in favor of us. So it's so important to meet with folks when you're doing strategic planning, because as a board and as administrators and decision makers, just like those elected officials, you're going to remember those stories from those community leaders or the people that you met with in those focus groups or those ask exercises out on the street. It's those stories that are going to come back to you as you're working with staff and director to really put the pen to paper and create those goals.
So well said, Brian.
So number 4 on the pre-submitted questions, our library's friends group does not have a strategic plan. Should they have a plan? or should their goals be part of the library's plan? And then who determines the Friends goals? Is it the library board? Is it the Friends group? How does that all work out if the Friends want to get organized too?
Good, Rebecca, get friendly.
I'll say the same answer we gave to the first question, which is it depends on your friends group. There's all shapes and sizes of friends groups in New York's libraries. We have, just a loose group of volunteers that pull off some cool events every year, right? And then we've got very highly organized, separately incorporated libraries that are bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars for their libraries. So the level of planning that needs to go into those types of friends are very, very different. So I think that it's always good for people to have goals when they're working together as a group. Like, it's cool to get together with people that you like and make good things happen for the community, but there also should be purpose behind the activities that we're doing, because that will be part of recruitment for future people to join friends groups. So I think that the one size fits all approach for libraries in the planning process that we provided, it's a little tougher with friends groups because they're not as structured on a daily basis for the work that they're doing. So I really do recommend, I know this book is getting older, but Dolnick's book on the Friends Group Source Book, I believe it's called. I know Source Book isn't the title, which should be enough to help you find it. But I bet there's some librarian online today who's going to post it before I finish this mangled sentence that I'm using. But there's planning resources in that document it's now called United for Libraries, but the organization, which is the division of ALA that helps friends groups, has advice on planning for friends. But again, I really do think it's going to be different if you've got an ad hoc group that just kind of like doing a little one fundraising event a year versus one that's like highly organized. I have one of like the best friends group in the state in my system, the Poughkeepsie Public Library District. They're so organized. They created their own bookstore. Like, they make hundreds of thousands of dollars in book sale every year. They need a strategic plan. But, my library that has like 3 ladies that like to get together and they knit together and sometimes they raffle off what they knit, maybe not so much.
I agree. Very variable depending on the size. Regardless, I think it's nice to have that kind of back and forth communication with the board, so the friends know what the strategic initiatives at the library is, and the library board knows what the friends are working on, just to help enhance that partnership. But yeah, ditto to everything that Rebecca said on that one.
All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of storytelling through this next question. Our library has updated its plan twice since I've been on the board. I've been on the board for 8 years, but we don't do anything with the plan after it is published. Can you recommend what we're supposed to do with the plan after it is created? Seems like unnecessary work if we don't do anything with it. And I know you guys already have talked about that, but can we elaborate?
Yeah, sure. It does seem like unnecessary work if you don't do anything with it. And I think when I first started to get interested in strategic planning, when I would ask or investigate kind of what the plans were for different types of organizations, some of them would kind of fumble around and say, I know it's here somewhere, but it wasn't anything that was at the forefront of your mind. And when you're looking at updating a strategic plan, like Rebecca and I were saying at the top, it really needs to kind of be a fluid living document that you should be checking in with on a regular basis. For plans or even project plans that I look at for the things that we're trying to accomplish at the system, it's something where I'm engaging with it on a regular basis, and then my board checks in with it, maybe not every month, but at least quarterly, and we're looking at what we've accomplished, what the process on some of these things are, how things are going. If something is a no-go, maybe we learned, as Rebecca said, a pandemic could really throw off what you're doing, or it could be something where sourcing materials has become next to impossible to be able to do something specific. So being able to pivot on that piece, or learning some new information where maybe this was a really good idea, but actually this is an even better idea, so let's go ahead and update. But taking that plan and looking at it, and I find that sometimes some of the issues that people get is they may have created this beautiful goal that they want to create, but they haven't done that step of breaking it down into those actionable steps. And again, if you have something where we want to be the lead in this in our community, like, how do you do that? That's not something that you can just say, go do this. It's something that needs to be broken up, that you need to figure out, how am I going to accomplish this? And I think that it can be daunting to have a plan with, even if it has, three awesome things on it. If you're not prepared to do the things to get to that point, it can be really hard to accomplish those things. So in order to do it, I would say look at it regularly, break stuff up so it's doable, and make sure that you can measure everything that's in there. Go ahead, Rebecca. What else? What did I miss on that one?
Well, I don't know if you missed. I don't think you missed anything. I just thought I would share. My own organization. I've been director here just over 5 years. Like I had to not just tell people how to do it, I had to do it myself, right? So I think some of the practical things we've implemented over the past few years that have really helped keep our planning at the forefront of discussions is we did move into that annualized plan based on the long range plan. And our board president convenes a meeting of our committee chairs in January and July. So in January, we're making sure all the leaders of our committees are super clear on how the work their committee does plays into the goals for the year. And then we're checking in with them mid-year to say, how's it going? Do you need any help? Is this working? Do you have any suggestions for how to make it better? And then we have other committees that are also involved in checkpoints. So like our personnel and planning committee is getting a mid-year report from me on how we're doing in terms of meeting our goals and what adjustments the staff are recommending. And the board usually says that makes a lot of sense. Let's adjust that and go off on this slightly changed trajectory. So I think it's up to the board leadership to create structure at meetings and to provide directives to committee chairs to help carry out the work. And it, of course, is your director's job to make sure the staff are focused on the goals for the year and the staff are reporting back to the director's reporting back to the board on if changes are going to be necessary based on things changing on the ground, like Ron said.
I thought of like two specific examples when this question came across the table. And then as you guys were talking, like from the board perspective, you do director evaluations every year. And so like one of the things that I enjoy about my director evaluation is we work together with the board to make sure that we're incorporating goals for the upcoming year for myself as a director that tie back to that strategic plan that we're working on. So we're staying focused on the mission by connecting the goals with the strategic plan. And then like the other thing that I think of is a very specific thing. Sometimes you'll have a project presented to the organization. Maybe it's a lump sum of money that's given by a foundation or a state agency, and they say, hey, we want you to go ahead and do this work. From the staff side of things, sometimes there's that conversation like, is this within alignment with what our plan says that we're going to do? And sometimes we don't have to take the money that's being put on the table just because it's money being put on the table. If it doesn't always align with that strategic plan based on those really meaningful conversations that we had with our community, maybe it's not what our community wants from us right now, even though somebody within the community thinks it's a good idea. So
Brian, I just want to +1 on your points about lining it up with the director evaluation tool that's used. And I'll also throw in, anytime you talk about the director's evaluation, you should also be talking about the board self-evaluation. Does the board self-evaluation include checking in about their awareness of the long-range plan and how it's going this year? So both sides of that equation should be held accountable on an annual basis for that work.
If you want to hear more, I think we talked about that before.
Oh yeah, that might be true.
I was just going to say, I feel like we've talked about that in another session.
Deja vu.
Nice.
No, that's good. It's a good plug for them to go watch the recording of that one.
So the handbook references multiple types of plans. For example, strategic plan, emergency response plan, long range plan. How can we check all the boxes on the recommended plans without spending all of our time planning?
Right. I know. It just seems like every time you turn around, there's a new plan. I'm working with I think I've mentioned her before, but Michelle Stricker down at the New Jersey State Library. She does excellent work on disaster preparedness for libraries. And I swear to God, in the 5 years I've worked with her, it went from needing a disaster preparedness plan to now we need that, plus an emergency action plan, an incident action plan, and a continuity of business. And I'm like, that's 4 plans that I used to need. What? Oh my goodness, right? So I think it's prioritization, right? We to be an effective organization, you need the top level plan done. And then you need to evaluate the other plans that are considered best practice, which ones are most acutely needed in your situation, right? Staff safety is number 1. So once you're done with your long range planning, maybe tackle those emergency preparedness plans and making sure your staff and your assets are well taken care of. So I think that as you learn more about plans and what's involved in them, there's different levels of work. There's different groups in the organization that are going to work on them. It's not all the planning committee of the board working on all the plans that are recommended for a library.
And there's a few plans here, but it kind of go like even what you're looking at for the operational stuff. There's going to be facilities plans. You want to know when things are going to fall apart, so you know that you can put money in reserve funds to be able to do that. There's technology plans. Your technology is constantly going to go outdated, and you're going to need to buy more computers and things like that. So planning as you're developing this stuff, it gets easier, and different people are going to do different pieces of it. But yeah, there's a lot of plans. I totally agree with Rebecca when it comes to prioritization to figure out which direction are you going to go in, what plans are we going to need to make sure that we're able to accomplish everything that we need to accomplish. Plans are a good thing. Don't spend all your time planning. I would say just sit down and kind of jot out what you think you need to have in that plan. And then depending on the level of involvement, there may need to be more people involved. And some plans you're going to change regularly as it moves forward, and that's okay too.
Maggie asked the question, do you feel phase one board visioning process, so the visioning process that you guys talked about as the board, is that require full participation on the board, or should it be a smaller subset of the board as an ad hoc committee? I'm thinking of maybe some of those boards with 15 members on them.
I think that's the kickoff event. That's a full board action before we hand things off to the planning committee. So I think it's something that is important for everyone to participate in, because what you don't want is someone who was left out of that process, and then you go through 6 months of analysis of the data you've gathered and the community input you've received, and they just like blow the whole thing out of the water because they had this other vision over here that never got surfaced. So like I said, I know it's a stupid phrase, but I said get the wiggles out at the beginning. That we have to respect the fact that trustees have passionate opinions about their library. They have more experience with this institution than almost any other community member. They have valuable insights to provide, and that should be surfaced early in the process. So they don't feel like, as you're starting to hear things from the community and the staff, that they're not like, but wait a minute, like we have an opinion too. That's why we're here, right? So it needs to be part of the conversation early on, and it should be everyone. And then again, we're going to funnel down after that and then come back around and gut check what we heard with the board's initial vision to see, does that still match, or do we want to have a larger conversation about that? So when Ron talked about the SOAR process, the strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results, that exercise then gets reported back to your board, and they have a second visioning conversation about, okay, now that we've got all this information, where are we going with it? And so those two things then meld together.
If you have people that are uninterested in a board visioning idea, then it's different work that you have to do, because you really need to make sure that all trustees are on board with planning for the library, and then making sure you're heading in a direction. There's going to be a lot of conversations about the vision of the library and the direction, but you need to make sure that everybody is an involved participant in that, because they should care about what's going on. They're entrusted with the resources. They need to be entrusted with the direction that they're going with as well.
Martha asked the question, what percentage response is considered reasonable for a survey? For example, what's a good response for a village or town of 2,000 people?
I think with this one, it depends. So there's two kind of ways to answer this. If you get a handful of responses, you can pull it out and you can say, you're not going to be able to say that people in our community said this based on your survey responses, unless it's like scientifically significant, which you can Google how to get those numbers in there. But what the number of people that you get in your survey is, you can say that people in our community were saying this, and that's essentially what you're trying to get out of a survey. Most likely you're not going to get a scientifically significant number of your population to take a survey, and that's fine, because you're just collecting some information from people. Now, if you have a population of 2,000 and only 10 people fill it out, then that was a pretty small survey sample, and I would take what I can get out of it and then kind of leave the rest. But if you get a couple hundred people, even 50 to 60 people with that, and you get some good ideas that come out of it, it, it's going to be a worthwhile exercise. So promote it, try to get as many people to take it as possible. Don't worry so much about it being like too much of a scientific factor. Just try to get as many people as you can to take it, and then just say, here's what we were hearing in the community. You couple this with the other information that you're collecting, and it kind of, the whole thing is going to tell a story.
There's lots of actually sample size calculators online. So there's industry standards for various industries of what response rate would be statistically relevant. But obviously we're not scientific researchers. We are social researchers that are volunteers doing our best if we can. So with my libraries, we aim for 5 to 10% of a population, but sometimes depending on the situation, lower can be statistically relevant if the trends are emerging pretty strongly. So that can also help strengthen your results when you see a lot of alignment in the responses that you're getting. So seriously, sample size calculator, Google it. You can use that if you want. It's a really hard number to base it on.
Okay, and this next question I think ties back to the library transforms framework and maybe the ask exercise. So Sonia asks, in your experience, do you have to explain to the group why you're asking these questions as opposed to questions about the library? So why are we asking about the community as opposed to asking about the library?
Yeah. So in the library's Transform Communities toolkit that is, I believe, was shared on the chat box and will be sent to you in a follow-up email, there is an opening letter that you can use as a script to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it the way you are. So they've done some of those talking points for you. It's very nice.
Otherwise, people will be like, I thought we were here for a library focus group.
And it also, I think it really does help because some of you know this already, but sometimes when you go out and ask people, I'm from the library, I want to ask you some questions, like, oh, I don't use the library. You don't want to talk to me. And here's this great moment where like, actually, you're the exact person we want to talk to, right? Because we just want to talk to people who live in the community. So it is another nice way to talk to some people that normally you wouldn't hear from in a process that's been done in the past.
And Marty asks, how do you get community members to participate? In the past, attendance has been low to in-person community input gathering sessions.
And Marty, I'm wondering if you're my Marty from one of my libraries, but it's work. It is work. When we do our cohort model that Ron mentioned, we have our library teams brainstorm twice as many people as they hope to speak with. And every single one of my libraries has underestimated how much time it will take them to issue the invitations and get the RSVPs they need to get the number of people in the room that we've targeted. Our goal is 8 to 10 people in the room for the focus group. That means we've got to be inviting 16 to 20 people to come to actually get that number. So it takes time. Don't underestimate it in your timeline. Usually you don't need to incentivize. I would say there's no need for giveaways, but food actually does work. People do like to come together. And when you tell them, I think, why you're doing it and how the information they give you is going to be used, that's another thing to reveal up front to help people understand that. But I think sometimes you just got to work your networks to find the people that will come in and help you out with this. So sometimes you're doing your first few focus groups with people that are very close to your organization. We actually do test run of our focus groups with the spouses of trustees to have a semi-friendly group of people helping us learn how to do the facilitation work. But general calls, like just putting it out there and hoping some people are going to show up does not work. You need to do one-on-one invitations, asking people to come in and telling them directly your input really matters to us. So it is labor intensive, 100%.
I'm just going to double down on the invitation part that Rebecca said. I've worked with libraries that just have kind of a passive sign-up sheet, or they treat it like a program and just allow people to sign up for it. And when you do that, people, they might come, but when you issue an invitation, you say, this is what we're working on, we would love to have your input. It makes it so much more personal, and people are, in my experience, more willing to come and talk with you and have candid conversations about answering these questions. So double down on the invite piece. Absolutely.
Jill mentioned in the comments earlier on, and I know some of my libraries did this coming out of the pandemic when we were still trying to stay a little bit further away from each other. What are your thoughts on hosting focus groups virtually as opposed to in person?
Can work in a pinch. I think you need a really good facilitator to do it. It's not the same vibe as in person. You get a real sense of community at the end of one that's done in person, and which you don't always get online. It's doable in a pinch, as I said.
I've tried facilitating a couple of them, but absolutely. I mean, I can see that, there's 200 plus people on here, but I don't see your faces. And, when you have focus groups, not everybody is as participatory. And I think a lot of us have gotten to the point where I know in a lot of meetings that I'm in, I'm camera off and I'm just kind of passively listening. But when you think about what you're looking for, you're trying to get that engagement. So like Rebecca said, you need to have a good facilitator that can kind of draw that out of people. And it's a little bit harder online. But yeah, if you in a pinch, you can definitely make it work.
And I mean, just like we talked about, there's double duty of all of this activity that you're doing. Part of what you're doing is demonstrating you're an open and accountable organization. The other thing you're doing is you're already starting to build community by bringing people together that might not otherwise be together. And so those social niceties get lost online, like where you'd be like meeting someone while you're both pouring a cup of horrible coffee, like, oh, like, hi, how you doing? Those little things, they matter. They help really connect people and make it more neighborly. And I think that's part of the process that's so powerful. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to denigrate everyone's coffee, but
it's so true. The coffee down in that meeting room I have is terrible.
Bad.
So we're coming up into the final 2 minutes, and we've had some really good questions submitted through the night. And so, like I said, we're curating these questions. So we want to make sure that we answer everybody's questions. If not here this evening, we'll make sure that we get to them at an after party. I am going to throw a little bit of a wrench into this thing, and I'm going to ask my own question so that we can finish on a strong note with Rebecca and Ron. But, you mentioned twice you're trying to sell us on this idea. And I just want you to be able to share with the group as we close here this evening, why? Like, let us know, why should we be doing strategic planning based on your own emotional perspectives as librarians?
Want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So it's called strategic planning. And when you think of like strategy, like you're kind of strategizing, but that's really not what we're doing. What we're trying to do is build a better library for the community that you have, and you're trying to implement these pieces of community input and reshape it in a way where people can see themselves in your library within your community. That's essentially what we're trying to do. People want to be able to come to your library, have a comfortable space, be able to socialize, get in touch with people, ask questions, get answers, get books, meet. There's so many things that people want to use your library for. And coming up with a plan is just, how can we allow that? How can we be the facilitators in our community so people can come to us and have a comfortable, wonderful experience with a lot of resources? So we're not trying to build a business strategy. What we're trying to do, and this is kind of the beauty of libraries, is that we get to be this really fantastic organization in our communities that really draw people together. And when I think about libraries and when I think about strategic plans, it's really that. It's what are the building blocks to making this library fantastic today, tomorrow, 10 years from now. And that's why I like planning. That's why I like doing projects. It's not about this specific thing we're doing right now, but what does it amount to in the end? And that, to me, I find very beautiful. And I very much love libraries that think like that too, is what can we do to make this a more fantastic place in the future for our community?
So we obviously should have made me go first, because that was perfect. Ron, and like
bring us down, Rebecca.
All right, no problem. But I have three. I double down on what Ron said 100%. I mean, that's what we're here to do, is to actually make a difference in people's lives, right? But I'll add two little things to it. Number one is I see a direct line between strong strategic plans and winning your votes. And I know that's not as warm and fuzzy as what Ron just said, but it is a reality.
But it's practical.
It really does make a difference. But the other thing I'll say that I don't know if people recognize is that we really want you as trustees to have a good experience as volunteers. And this has been key to it in our experience, that when you engage in meaningful work and you feel like your time has been well spent, and you see that the work you're doing is making a difference, it makes you want to do more and will tell other people, this has been a great experience, you should come volunteer too, right? So it's this very holistic kind of, it's all connected, it all works to create something wonderful for the community, but we also want to make sure trustees are having a good experience as volunteers of the library. And this, in my experience, has been very key to that.
I always like it when Ron and Rebecca wear their heart on their sleeves when it comes to librarianship. One last time, thank you, Rebecca Smith-Aldrich and Ron Kursup, for your time, energy, and talents. I think it is also important to say thank you to our public library systems across New York State. We encourage all trustees to reach out to your library system for everyday support. Additionally, please don't forget to visit the Trustee Handbook Book Club website, which can be found visiting midhudson.org/trustee book club. As a reminder, certificates for tonight's session will be emailed to registered participants at the end of this month in August. And moreover, please place the next Trustee Handbook book discussion on your calendars, which happens Tuesday, October 17th at 5:00 p.m. We'll discuss equity, diversity, inclusion, access, and justice with our guest presenter, Freddie Garcia. And finally, thank you to all of our library trustees across New York State. Again, I know I speak on behalf of our entire Trustee Handbook Book Club planning team. We appreciate all that you do, and we genuinely enjoy doing this work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Laura.